What's up, guys? Cascade Miniatures back with another video tutorial, and this time we're going to be taking a look at the fourth part of our Fundamentals tutorial series by demonstrating texture and pigment powder applications. Alright guys, so this is going to be a pretty simple, pretty short video. Just covering just a couple techniques that we can use to add that mood and that atmosphere to our models. So mood and atmosphere, very important for Grimdark painting. And we can do lots of things to add mood and atmosphere by using, muted color palettes, very desaturated colors. And another thing we can do is just simply adding texture to the model. So this goes a long way in adding lots of atmosphere and mood to your model. So there's two products I like to use. One being Agrellan Earth from Citadel. That's a pretty simple product. It's water-based, and pretty much the way that it works is it has a medium inside of it, and when that medium starts to dry, it kind of pulls the pigment apart, and you get a crackle effect. So pretty simple. What I like to do is I like to add multiple layers of this. So I know a lot of people like to slap this on there really thick and get, lots of really big crackle effects in the model, but I like to do just two to three layers, real thin, on there, and kind of observe how each layer dries. So I add one layer and dry it, see where the crackling's happening, and then I come back and I do a second, maybe a thicker layer, and I'll blow dry that and see what that looks like. But like I said, very simple here. This is a very easy product to get a hold of. Gives a great effect. This is also good for basing and stuff like this, but we can use this on models, and I like to apply my textures before primer, or you can prime and then do a layer of texture and then prime back over it. But a good time to do this is like one of the first steps. Just go ahead and add that texture in there. And mainly, you just can't be afraid of obscuring detail. So like I was saying earlier, we're primarily looking to add mood and atmosphere to the model, and sometimes when we do that with texturing, we're going to be obscuring detail, but that just adds to the effect, so you can't really be too afraid to do that. The other product I like to use is Vallejo Thick Mud. It works a lot like Typhus Corrosion, except for it's just way thicker. So when you get this right out of the bottle, it's like a very thick paste, and makes a very good kind of chunder type effect. Really good to use on like bare metals that are heavily rusted and stuff like that. So for the first layer, I just like to work straight out of the bottle. Just use an older brush and kind of work around the model and just add that kind of chundered effect where I like it. So after I do one pass, I'll do a second pass, and I'll kind of thin it down a little bit so we can add a little bit of water onto our brush and kind of work around some other flatter surfaces and kind of just do a thinner application that's just going to give you a very slight kind of grainy effect. And we're just gonna work through the model doing these couple layers. So when we're doing this on like a regular miniature, which we will demonstrate in the following videos, we kind of want to work this in obvious areas. So a good general way to apply this to a model would be like kind of down towards the feet, or other good places be like around pipe connections, like where pipes go into book bags or something like that. We might have some rust or gunk there, so we can always add texture to that to just add another layer of detail. So we can also thin this down further and do some spattering like I just did there. That little bit of spattering will show up because it's such a thick paste that you're spattering that those little spatter marks will show up. So after we get those two products on, I'm going to go ahead and prime the model at this point. So when I'm priming it, all I'm doing is I'm just taking a look to see if I'm happy with the result. So if we got something that looks pretty cool, looks pretty good, we'll keep it there. We can always go in and add additional layers if we need to. And but this looks pretty good. This looks pretty okay for a test piece. So I'll move on into base coloring, and then I'll do our wash and reductive technique that we've talked about in the previous video. So if you haven't watched those, you want to check those out to see kind of the process that I use to get something painted up and kind of grind up and a little bit weathered. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is going to be pigment powder application. So there are quite a lot of companies that make pigment powders, but for the most part, I just like to use Vallejo or AK Interactive. They're pretty much the exact same. You know, any pigment powder that you can get a hold of is probably going to work just fine. I've never really used one that it looks better than the other. Some lines have more color variation, but for the most part, we're going to be using pigment powders to do things like rust and dirt and just kind of like colorations, sandy effects, that kind of thing. So pretty much any line that you can get is fine. I like to just get Vallejo and get some variations of rust and dirt and stuff like that. Just browns and ochres would be fine. And then the way that I apply it is really simple. I just go into the bottle, straight out of the bottle, use it like a pretty heavy application. So I like to get a lot of pigment powder and just kind of let it fall and collect in the crevices on the model, and then I just simply dust it back off. That's the application is really simple. You know, just dust it back off like we're just kind of cleaning it back up. One of the things that I do want to talk about that is a lot of people seem to struggle with pigment powders is how to retain that dusty effect, because that's the whole reason we're using them. We want this surface variation. It's a very important part of painting in any style, really, is you want to create surface variation, and that creates a lot of realism. So a lot of people struggle with that with pigment powders simply because they will try to seal them in with a varnish, or they will try to use a pigment fixer to make the pigment stick to the model. I'll first say that using a pigment fixer is something that I don't do. I don't use a pigment fixer at all, but if you do use a pigment fixer, go ahead and apply the pigment fixer first, and while it's still wet and tacky, go back over it with your pigment powders. And once that fixer dries, it adheres to the model, and it also kind of locks in that pigment. But the most important thing is we want to retain the dry look. We need that powdery dry look to be there when we get done. As far as varnishing over top of this, if you're going to varnish your models, varnish it before you add pigment powders. During the whole painting process, I've never really varnished anything. Maybe sometimes I'll lock in a base color before I do any type of weathering, but for the most part, nothing I do gets varnished or clear coated. As far as like handling your models go, I typically just handle them by the base, so that way it's really not an issue. You know, and if you drop a model, you know, that's unfortunate. I don't really think that acrylic clear coats really protect from that sort of thing. They're more there to kind of protect from like oil and stuff like that. So I just typically don't use them at all. So we don't really don't use them for pigment powder because it just ruins the effect here. So after I get the pigment powders on there, one of the things that I like to do to kind of finish up is just take my airbrush and blow the rest of the loose pigments off. So this just an airbrush with just blowing air through it, nothing else. And then I'll come back through with a Q-tip and mineral spirits and kind of just clean up some areas, just tidy it up. You know, so really simple process here, just adding texture in those pigment powders. And the pigment powder thing, a lot of people overthink it. It's just really simple. Just apply it on there and then clean it off, blow it off with an airbrush, and just be done with it. You know, don't seal this in. And like I'm saying, if you use a pigment fixer, kind of just use the pigment fixer first. And so as we move on through the series, we're about to wrap it up, about to finish up. We'll show how this looks on the Death Guard model that we showed in the last video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and we'll catch you in the next one.